I wonder if you have spoken to any of AK Party's supporters about how they feel if this race goes into a runoff.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? The music's getting quite loud here now, Jafar.
Sure. Absolutely, I can totally understand that. So, Andrew, what I was asking is that we don't know whether or not it's going to go into a runoff, but based on what we are seeing right now, it looks likely that something like that could happen. So I wonder if you got the opportunity to speak to any of AK Party's supporters about how they feel if the presidential race goes into a runoff.
I think they would be quite confident if there was to be a runoff, because I think what the president will probably say about the situation is that the parliamentary results, if they continue in the way they are at the moment, his alliance, the People's Alliance, would have a majority in Parliament. And I think part of his campaign for the next couple of weeks will be to say something like, if you want a government of chaos, then you would vote in Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, his rival, the main opposition leader, who is standing against him in the presidential election, because you would have a president from the opposition and you would have a parliament from the current government. And I think this would probably be his main selling point. And I think the people here would be, I think, probably fairly confident that he may be able to win in the next round. He would also, I think Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu would probably need to get all of the votes from Sinan Oğan, the third candidate, who's got about 5% at the moment. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu would need all of that to probably pass the 50% mark. As I say, we're not quite there with the final result, but there's something like less than 10% to go now. And that's another factor that would probably work in the Turkish president's favour. So I think there would be people here who'd be quite hopeful, quite optimistic that he could win the contest in the second round.
Indeed, and it looks like Sinan Oğan could be the kingmaker here. Andrew Hopkins live for us from AK Party's headquarters here in the Turkish capital. Thank you very much indeed. And now let's go to one of the most important provinces of Turkey, Istanbul. Melinda Nusifora joins me now live from there. Melinda, you know, as you have been saying, there is a famous saying here in Turkey that whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey. We don't know the definitive results of that province, but we do know in 2018's presidential elections, President Erdogan won in Istanbul with 50% of the votes, while his main rival at the time, Muharrem İnce, was at around 36%. But based on what we are seeing right now, it looks like President Erdogan is trailing behind, but just by 1%.
That very famous adage, as you just referenced there, if you win Istanbul, you win Turkey, may not ring true this time around. This presidential election has been the most hotly contested. It's been the closest. It's also been the one that people have perhaps watched with such fascination, because it just seems like it has been surprise after surprise. And yes, it does appear, if at this stage the opposition candidate is ahead in Istanbul province but is trailing overall, neither candidate, though, has that all-important 50% mark to get them a clear, outright first-round victory. So nothing has really gone according to the playbooks for this presidential election. In Istanbul, I can tell you that the roads are eerily quiet. People are glued to their television. Behind me, it's a little bit hard for you to see because it's so dark now. We're coming just past midnight local time in Istanbul. But the very famous bridge that connects Europe and Asia across that Bosphorus Strait is behind me. And it is usually jam-packed with traffic at all hours of the day. I have never seen it quite as empty as it is tonight. Just an indication, everyone is at home, glued to their televisions, watching as these results just continue to trickle in.
Indeed, Maria, Melinda, sorry about that. And, you know, we might be looking for another unprecedented scenario based on what we have right now. A runoff that is going to take place in the next 14 days. I wonder how are people in Istanbul going to receive that news? Do you think they're mentally prepared? Because I mean, I live in Istanbul myself, and based on what I have noticed in the run-up to these elections, people were expecting that these elections are going to basically end in the first round, wasn't it?
I think that there has been such a heightened sense of anticipation, of anxiety from both sides leading into this presidential race particularly, because it was always going to be so close. And it almost feels anticlimactic, and perhaps people are really going to be struggling to maintain that emotional energy to get back to the polls in 2 weeks' time, if that is indeed where the country finds itself. It is going to be very important for both of those presidential candidates to try and maintain those energy levels for their constituents, to re-galvanise the population, to keep up that energy for another 2 weeks and head back to the polls again. Voter turnout this year for this presidential race has been, it's looking like being at an all-time high. So that is just another indication of how important the country has viewed this election. And I dare say it's going to galvanise people moving forward. They've come out in force this round. They're going to have to pick themselves up, re-energise, but they will be out again in force for round 2, because this is the closest presidential race in Turkey's history. Everyone wants to be a part of that, and this is their opportunity to have their voices heard.
All right, Melinda Nusifora live for us from Istanbul. Melinda, thank you very much for that update. And now let's unpack all of this with Ahmet Keser from Kalyoncu University. Professor, great to have you here with us again. Now, just want to pick up on one thing that Melinda was saying, that these are certainly the closest presidential elections this country has seen in its modern history.
For sure, I think. Before, we didn't have that much competition, first of all, and after all those catastrophes and earthquake event, COVID-19 event, so I think everybody has some ideas, of course, but they would wonder how those events will impact the results of presidential elections. And we see now the results, and of course Erdogan is leading.
And I just want to, if I may interrupt, I just want to speak to the live pictures that we are seeing on our screens right now. I believe they're coming out of AK Parti's headquarters in Ankara. Professor, now we do not have a definitive winner, but it appears that President Erdogan is still in the lead, and this is primarily why people are celebrating. And this goes to show that if this goes into a second round, these people, the supporters of AK Party and President Erdogan, are very confident that he's going to win.
We may see that as an indicator, because the gap between the two most prominent competitors is around 4 to 5%, and the gap does not seem to be closed in the second round as well. And when we look at the distribution in the parliament, we can see that the majority is held by People's Alliance, because in the parliament, to pass the regular laws, you should have the simple majority, which is much more than, you have to have more than 300 duties at the parliament. And as of now, the most leading parties in the alliance, one of them, AK Party, has, I think, 269, and National Movement Party has 51. So it is around 320 duties to be represented in the parliament. So it is enough for passing the regular laws, but not enough for changing the constitution, because for that you should have a qualitative majority more than 400. But when we look at on the side of execution, it is good, because you may take the decisions and send the policies to be transformed into law, and they might be passed in the parliament in this case. Otherwise,
Right.
it might be problematic.
Let's talk more about the parliamentary elections, Professor. Now, of course, we don't have the full results, but it appears that the coalition, or the alliance rather, of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's party, the AK Party, the People's Alliance, is leading the polls. So how would you compare what we are seeing right now to the parliamentary election results of 2018?
It seems that they are losing some of the seats which they had before, but I mean, in this case, they have more than half of the majority of the parliament, so that is enough for passing the laws. But for changing some important laws, maybe all the parties will need to go looking for some consensus with other parties as well. So we may see some consensual results or efforts in the parliament to gather support from all layers of the society as well in this case. And also another issue is important, because if the parliament, any government or execution which does not have the majority will have problems in implementing the policies as we mentioned earlier. So for a stable execution, and there should be a convenience between the legislation and executive powers. So that may empower the hands of Erdogan for the second round as well. That might be an indicator. And also Sinan Oğan's votes will play a significant role during
It's going to be crucial. He could be the possible kingmaker, as my colleague Alican said. Professor Ahmet Kesser, thank you very much for that. And as we saw on our screens a few moments ago, that celebrations at AK Party's camps, both in Ankara and Istanbul, are underway. Even though we do not have a definitive winner in this election up until now, it looks likely that this is going into a runoff. And the fact that AK Party supporters are celebrating if it goes into a runoff shows that they're very confident that the president is going to secure a victory if this goes into a runoff. That's all for now from Ankara.
24 minutes past midnight across Turkey, as you just saw in those pictures we showed you from Istanbul and Ankara. People are celebrating, not sure exactly what they're celebrating because the count is not over. We are getting very, very close to knowing who the president will be after this. It looks pretty much, it is, let's be honest, a head-to-head contest, because Sinan Oğan of the right-wing ultra-nationalist Ata Alliance is out of the race in terms of who's going to become president. You've been hearing a lot of chat, and you will do throughout the course of the rest of the evening, and probably even longer, if these two gentlemen on the left of your screen, Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, do make it to that runoff, which would happen on the 28th of this month. Anything over 50% is enough to win the presidential contest in the first round, but it looks more than likely that it's going to go to a second round unless that about 7% of the vote that is still to be counted makes a difference, and presumably it's more likely to make a difference to Recep Tayyip Erdogan because he's so much closer to passing that 50% threshold. Those are the very basic numbers, but the tension is rising. Alican.
Adnan, if this was a 100-meter race, we are down to the last 7 meters between these four candidates. Two gentlemen are leading the pack. That is President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He stands at just under 50% of the votes. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, for the past few hours, has been inching his way up, trying to get as many votes as possible. But if this trend continues, the trend that we've been seeing for the past 5, 6, 7 hours continues, is that President Erdogan, although holding on to a commanding or a lead, his votes have now fallen below the all-important 50% threshold. Let's bring in Ahmet Uysal, who is the director of Orsam Center for Middle Eastern Studies. Ahmet, good to have you back on. I know it's been a long evening. From the looks of it, it is going to be we're only in the middle of this long evening. Let's bring up the latest numbers. I want to sort of get your analysis.
Sure.
Because it's been a couple of hours since I last spoke to you. If I could ask our director to put onto screen the latest numbers. Let me actually just read it out for our viewers. 93.7% of the ballots counted. President Erdogan is at 49.6%. He has just close to 25.5 million votes. His main contender, the candidate of the main opposition, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, just under 23 million votes. He's at 44.6%. Sinan Oğan, I think the only consistent number that we've seen throughout the night, is not President Erdogan, it's not the main challenger, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, but it is Sinan Oğan. He has not moved below 5.3, and he hasn't surpassed 5.4. Is this the big surprise of the evening?
This is a big surprise. It's also related to this gentleman, his withdrawal in the last minute. Also, this new presidential system and the second round is not tested in Turkey so far. So this is going to be a new experiment with Turkish democracy, how people want to react in the second round. But it is close to to be held in the second round. I mean, looks like the numbers will be steady in this, more or less. You know, fractions only. Yeah, it's a big number, and now probably AK Party's or Erdogan's number going down will be little bit, balanced by the overseas votes. Also, probably favor Erdogan. And we'll see the second round. But the significance is the Sinan Oğan was not a figure, known figure so far, with the internet, with the youngsters, with also the exit of Muharrem İnce, plus some reactions to both candidates like Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu, who are not happy with both of them, voted for him. So, of course, people were, both sides trying to attract his supporters in a way that's let's finish it in the first round, but this didn't happen. So this gentleman became a political figure in Turkish politics, and I think that we'll see bargaining. But this is significant, the 5%.
There is a lot to unpack here. I want to ask you what your opinion in terms of how Sinan Oğan gets a 5.3%. Is it the fact that when Muharrem İnce pulled out about 72 hours ago, that some of his support actually went to Sinan Oğan because these two gentlemen were more representative of the protest vote, or is it because of the better than expected nationalist vote that we're seeing, especially on the parliamentary side?
I think it is mixed. Several factors we can mention. Muharrem İnce we already mentioned. Also, İYİ Party did not perform well in the elections, or they themselves were worried about this Kılıçdaroğlu being Kurdish and Alawite at the same time as a candidate. They didn't see it as a popular candidate. She insisted on that when they kind of pushed for a maybe de facto candidacy. She agreed at the end, but she was protesting, and it hurt her. So some of the nationalist votes from the İYİ Party might have also helped Sinan Oğan in this round. So we have İnce's votes, we have İYİ Party's votes, we have some reactions, maybe close to AK Party, but they somehow want to send some message to Erdogan and to the ruling party. Some protest votes maybe went to him. Also, maybe some even nationalist CHP members. We have it in the West and in big cities also. Which he performed well, but some of them, even a fraction, maybe one or half percentage or 1% maybe also coming from the CHP. So it's a mix, I think.
If Sinan Oğan is the big surprise, I'm not going to say the big winner.
Many of the first timers also, I think, voted for him.
Do you think it's also fair to say that perhaps the person that has caused the most disappointment is the number 2 party in Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's alliance, and that of the İYİ Party and Meral Akşener, also a nationalist party.
Yes, it can also help us to explain why MHP, as a nationalist party, is part of the Cumhur coalition.
The Nations Alliance.
Nations Alliance. Also,
the People's Alliance, I'm sorry.
Some of them, also MHP performed well in the parliamentary elections, which shows there are some parallelity that people stay away from the original big numbers that E party was showing in the polls, but actual poll, which is the elections, didn't show the same outcome. So this is very interesting, very telling, and of course this 4%, if it went to Erdogan, we'll maybe finish off here. See, 6%.
Are you talking about the 0.4% of Muharrem İnce?
Yeah, Muharrem İnce. If everything possible, we cannot act on the presumptions, but still, like 0.4% might have sealed these elections in the first round, or some fractions maybe. But and also many foreign votes, overseas votes already cast out before he resigned. So. This is not fair to these guys, but his supporters. But this happened at the end. His party also performed poorly in the elections.
It would be interesting to see how much of the 232,000 votes is actually coming from abroad, and how much that were cast in Turkey. Obviously, the big difference being the withdrawal announcement coming from.
Yes, in theory, of course, not all of them will go to one candidacy, but in practice, if this is a trio or quart, four candidacy makes a big difference. There is a big difference between 2 and 3. There is a big difference between 3 and 4. So if he just didn't, for example, enter the race in the beginning, we would have different dynamics. Even the impact would be more than 0.4. So.
And I think sort of at a very rudimentary political analysis, because Muharrem İnce used to be a member of Kılıçdaroğlu's party, the CHP, keep that in mind, and Sinan Oğan being a former member of the MHP, who is currently a political ally of President Erdogan. Is that a fair assumption in terms of how these votes might be distributed in the second round?
Probably, yes. This fraction is important. This 5% is very important. What I was trying to say is that, because he left, in the last minute, he didn't give a lot of time to their supporters to choose. So they had to choose in a rush, in a way. That maybe sometime it takes you to mature this idea. Sometime maybe it's too soon, too hot. The reaction would be, different. As a sociologist, I know, also these dynamics. Psychology makes a difference also. But overall, not all of them, even Sinan Oğan declared to join one party, to one candidacy, doesn't translate into, as I said, there are many different factors voting for him. So it doesn't go to one candidacy. I think it's going to be favoring Erdogan more.
Yeah.
Because he also separated from the MHP, which is an ally to Erdogan.
Yeah.
So these, maybe 2/3 of these votes is likely to go to Erdogan. And also he's nationalist, and Kılıçdaroğlu being a Kurdish may backfire, but his presence if he declares support for Erdogan may bother some of the Kurdish votes. So it is, put in one basket. It can weigh in differently in the other.
So many balls up in the air to juggle. It looks like all of these things are going to be playing a very important role in terms of who gets to lead the country for the next 5 years. Ahmet, a pleasure to talk to you. Marie, as you can tell, the race is neck and neck, you could say. President Erdogan is just below about 0.4 of a percentage point below that all-important 50% threshold. I know that you were going to be checking in on both camps, so over to you.
Alican, thank you so much. And as you say, lots of balls up in the air right now, and it has just gone 12:30 a.m. local time here in Turkey. Let's take you to Ankara, to the AK Party headquarters. Andrew Hopkins is there. And even though we don't have any confirmed numbers right now for a victory, Andrew, how hopeful are the people behind you that they will see the president back, to continue being president?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say they're hopeful of seeing him back as president tonight at this stage, but I think they're certainly hopeful that if this does go to a second round, as it seems to indicate at the moment, they are pretty confident that he will win at that stage. I think we're looking like a situation where the president will be likely to say, with the results from the parliament looking as they are at the moment, that his People's Alliance will have control of the parliament. And when he comes to campaign for the next 2 weeks, he'll be saying, why would you vote for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who's the opposition's candidate to be president, and create a sort of chaotic situation where the president is from one side of the political spectrum and the parliament is from the other, and there are going to be difficulties for those two sides to work together. And I think that is going to be probably, I mean, I've no specific inside information, but I would suspect that would be the type of plan, the type of campaign he would try to run over the next couple of weeks. And also, Sinan Oğan, who is looking like he's going to win 5% of the overall vote, as the way the percentages stand at the moment, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu would need to win probably all of his votes to take him past that 50% barrier in 2 weeks' time to win the presidency. And that probably would be a tall ask as well, even if Sinan Oğan's urged all of his voters to vote for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. So I think these are the kinds of sort of basis that a lot of his supporters here think that ultimately Recep Tayyip Erdogan will emerge victorious, even if it's only a couple of weeks down the line.
Andrew, as we approach that all-important mark of 100% of the votes counted, we are still not even at 95% of votes counted for the presidential election. Just remind us of what would happen, could happen if it does go to a second round. What would that mean, and what happens in practice over these next 2 weeks?
Well, what would happen is we'd have another 2 weeks of campaigning by the Turkish president, the current president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's representing the People's Alliance, and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who is representing the Nations Alliance, the main opposition bloc, if you like, in Turkish politics at the moment. And after that campaign finishes on May the 28th, there will be another presidential election, a runoff, but only between those two candidates. So one of them will ultimately have more than 50% of the vote. And at that point, we will have a winner. That will either be Recep Tayyip Erdogan or Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. At that point, Recep Tayyip Erdogan will get another 5 years in office. If he wins, that'll mean he will likely to serve 14 years as president, to follow on from 11 years after being prime minister. But if he loses, then Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu will, for the first time in his political career, hold high office and become the president of the Republic of Turkey.
Andrew, for now, thank you very much indeed. Andrew Hopkins live there outside the AK Party headquarters in Ankara. All right, I hand it over now to Hazem.
Thanks very much, Maria. Welcome to our continuing coverage of the Turkish presidential and parliamentary elections. I'm Hazem Sika. It has just gone 12:40 here in Istanbul. Joining me in our studio is our editor-at-large, Yusuf Erim, and Valeria Gianotta, director of the CESPI's Observatory, for more in-depth analysis on this. Good to have you both with us. Valeria, let me start with you first. 93% of the votes counted so far, very close at this point. The talk at the moment is of the likelihood of a runoff. If that happens, what are the implications then for both of the two main candidates?
Well, definitely it will depend on how the support of Sinan Oğan will be split. I mean, if those support will go to the Erdogan's bloc or to the Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Sinan Oğan is ideologically more close to Erdogan as he comes from MHP. And he will be nice, maybe it's just wishful thinking, to see him like Erdogan compromise with him and trying to give a more open vision. But we will see what will happen anyway.
And so, Yusuf, your view on this, I mean, it does look increasingly likely at this point that we'll be back here again in 2 weeks for that runoff vote. What do you see as the implications of that then?
Well, when we look at what a second round could look like or a runoff could look like on May 28th, obviously Sinan Oğan will be out. His 5.3% vote will be in play. So will the near 1% that Muharrem İnce got also. That'll also be in play. So you're talking about 6% vote in play. Now, as Valeria stated, Sinan Oğan, a nationalist, former member of the MHP, a party that's in Erdogan's alliance, very close ideologically to the People's Alliance. One would assume that his supporters and himself would probably sway his support towards Erdogan in a runoff. Also, when we look at the way Parliament's playing out right now, the People's Alliance will most likely take the majority in Parliament as well if these numbers hold up. So that's also a psychological advantage heading into the runoff. So Erdogan very close to the 50% threshold already. He doesn't really need a lot of votes if these numbers hold up. So it's looking heavily in his favor, let's say, if it goes to a second round.
Okay, and there's also a lot of the foreign vote question as well. A lot of votes still to be counted for Turkish people voting overseas. How does that impact into this, Yusuf?
Well, foreign votes traditionally during elections that Erdogan has been a part of, he's gotten the majority of foreign votes. He normally gets between 55 to 60% of the vote, especially in countries that are heavily populated with Turkish diaspora, like Germany, Holland, Belgium, France, throughout the Central Europe, Northern Europe, Western Europe. In those countries, he garners a lot of the Turkish diaspora's votes. I don't know how much of the vote is left. I think about 75% of the diaspora vote hasn't been counted, but I don't think there are enough diaspora votes left uncounted to bring Erdogan back over the 50%. He would probably have to fare very, very well with the remaining votes to be able to go back above the 50% threshold. So it's looking more and more like a runoff. Not definite yet. He can still pull through with a victory tonight, but looking more like a runoff.
Valeria, what's your perspective on how people outside of Turkey will be looking at this?
Well, definitely the affluence to the poll station was very high, extraordinarily this time, and many young people decided to go and cast their vote. And I think that the diaspora abroad also acknowledged the fact that Erdogan, thanks to his own public diplomacy, recognized the existence and gave voice to this diaspora, for example, through the YTB agency and something like this. Definitely this will make the difference in counting the votes, but as Yusuf said, I do not think that according to the time being, it will be enough to make Erdogan winning in the first round, so we may go to the second round.
And in terms of the issues, the main issues that were in voters' minds when they went to the polls on Sunday, what do you think are the most? I mean, obviously, people have been talking about the economy. Is that really the big one for many people?
I think there are several factors. First of all, it will be continuity against reforming, I mean, a regime change. That was the opposition was proposing. And then some more issues on the table, like economy, migration, for example, fight on terrorism as well, and also the regional stance, the international stance of Turkey was a very discriminant point because, I mean, thanks to President Erdogan, Turkey has been playing a key role in the region, like as a main broker between Ukraine and Russia. He was the main architect of the grain corridor, for example, and it comes automatically that the stability of the country is a sort of condition for the stability of the region and vice versa. And it's something that opposition, I think, did not really touch. To some extent, was just following Erdogan's rhetoric in some opposite tone sometimes. But I think those were the main discriminant points. And one more factor was the youth, I mean, the role of the young people in Turkey. And I think the youth in Turkey made a very discriminant vote in this election.
Yusuf, what do you see as the main issues at stake here then?
Well, I think Valeria explained it very well. Obviously, inflation, the economy, that's the main issue, central issue that was heading into elections. But many people expected Erdogan to lose more votes because of the inflation economy issue. But over the past couple of weeks, he's been taking some very good measures to be able to provide a support and cushion for citizens that were suffering from higher prices. And this is something that he's been pledging to concentrate more on going forward. So he's been able to win back many of the votes that he might have lost due to the economy and inflation. And another main issue, refugees, 3.5 million Syrian refugees, more than 4 million total. This is something that has been very, very central. Both candidates have very different paths on the refugee issue. The Turkish president, in a very recent interview, he wasn't too keen on returning refugees right now. He said, yes, they do need to return one day, but it's not safe to go back to Syria yet. But Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition alliance presidential candidate, he is very keen on normalizing with Assad very, very soon, and he does want to return these refugees back. Another key issue has been earthquake recovery. I think that's been very, very important. And judging from the votes that Erdogan got in the earthquake zone and also his alliance got in the earthquake zone, it seems that earthquake victims have given his People's Alliance the stamp of approval that they've done a satisfactory job in being able to begin the rebuilding process and the aid and recovery process throughout the earthquake zone.
Just want to talk a little bit about the third place candidate, Sinan Oğan. He's gotten so far 5.3% of the vote. What do you make of that, and how does that figure into the possibility of a runoff if that happens?
Well, if you had to ask me what the biggest surprise today was, Sinan Oğan would be part of that biggest surprise, but I think overall the nationalist vote, not just Erdogan's
They got
partner.
more than expected.
They definitely got more than expected because you have both nationalist parties above the 10% threshold with the E Party on the Nations Alliance side, MHP on the People's Alliance side. They're both above 10%. You've got Ata Alliance, which is Sinan Oğan's alliance. They're about 2.2%. And with some of the other smaller nationalist groups, when you put all that together, it's a 25% block of nationalist vote in Turkey. And that's very, very close to record levels. Could be record levels. I'd have to check the previous elections. But when you look at it as a nationalist ideology, that's very high to get 25%. Sinan Oğan running on his own a year ago, a relatively unknown former member of the MHP getting 5.3%. When you have two big names running for president, that's also very impressive as well. So it seems that the nationalists came out in full force, and that voter bloc, whether it be on either side, the opposition or the government, that just the nationalist voter bloc has increased with this younger generation of voters.
Let's talk a little bit about turnout, voter turnout. If I could turn back to you, Valeria, on this. 88% voter turnout, I understand, very high compared to a lot of countries. But what do you make of that?
Well, definitely there is a symbolic element because in the 2023 is the century of the foundation of the Republic of Turkey. And Erdogan himself is introduced as the new leader, the one who proposed a new model for Turkey, the Yeni Turkey. And is leading the country also to be an international and global actor in the international arena. But out of that, as I said, what was in the main stake, it was continuity of regime change. So that was felt by the majority of the people in the country. And also, I will say that identity issue played a big role in this election. And we shouldn't forget Kılıçdaroğlu's statement related to Alevi and his Kurdish origin, while on the other side, Erdogan played and invested a lot, again, in his conservative side. And it's not a case that his political rally yesterday, it was over in Hagia Sophia, and it was made by the huge crowd of very conservative and religious people. And I think this shows that religion in Turkey, no matter what, but it matters. I mean, it matters a lot. It's part of the identity of this country.
And this is why many people voted for Erdogan, because
him,
that's what he represents.
Yeah.
If I turn back to you, Yusuf, on this, the voter participation, I mentioned there 88%. That's a number that a lot of other countries would envy, isn't it? I mean, and this has been you've seen this pattern in a lot of Turkish elections. What do you make of that?
Turkish elections generally get more than 80% voter turnout, so it's not a surprise. But this, even amongst Turkish elections, is very, very high up there. This could also be a record, I'm not sure, but 88%, very high. Turks believe in the sanctity, the integrity, and the importance of exercising their most principal democratic right, which is voting. They love to vote. They believe how important it is picking their leader, and leaders get their strength from the people's will. They get it from the ballot box. And Erdogan, throughout his career, I believe this is now the 10th election he's won. Well, not this one, but the 10 elections beforehand, he has won. So this would have been his 11th election. This is back to when he was prime minister and mayor. So he has always gotten his strength from the ballot box, and this is something that he has always placed great importance on. And while we're speaking, also in the background, you can see the AKP flags. We had just saw the Turkish president's motorcade going by. I was watching it. I was watching it while you were asking a question. Sure. So it looks like his motorcade was on the move. But the ballot box.
Yeah, we were hearing that he was going to speak very soon.
Yes,
so,
the ballot box is very important to him. Turks really value the vote. They do value their democracy as well. And again, this being such the campaign period was so polarizing. Both candidates really hitting at each other, both alliances hitting at each other, and it got voters excited, it got voters mobilized, and everyone did go out and perform their civic duty.
We'll talk a little bit more about Turkish President Recep Erdogan right now, because in a tweet, we're going to show you. I believe we're going to show you a tweet of this right now. Do we have that? A tweet, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that the positive atmosphere surrounding the elections shows the country's democratic maturity. He also called on his supporters to protect the ballot boxes until the results are finalized. The fact that Turkey's elections as well took place in the form of a great feast of democracy in peace and tranquility is an expression of the democratic maturity of our country, as the vote counting is still going on. Trying to announce results prematurely is a usurpation of the national will. We are pleased that the vote count reflects the favor of the nation. I ask all of my supporters to stay at the ballot boxes no matter what until the results are finalized. I congratulate all my citizens who voted in the name of democracy and who worked on the election effort, and I express my gratitude to each and every one of them. So that kind of hits on some of the things that you were saying there, Yusuf, about the voter participation. I want to turn to Valeria on this and get your take on this and the tweet that Erdogan sent out there.
I think it shows, as Yusuf said, a great responsibility of Turkish people, and also they are very responsive. Anytime there is a challenge, and they are able to take it and to respond. And this shows also there is a resilience of this country and Turkish people in general. It was proved by the unfortunate earthquakes last February. I mean, despite the trauma that this country has experienced, I mean, they were able sort of to go over it and also to participate in the earthquake most hidden area with a high turnover. So I think, once again, I mean, Turkish people, they are aware of the power that they have. They are aware that they could participate and the political stake in the big political game in the country.
You mentioned the earthquake and the government's recovery effort. It was pointed out earlier in the night that Erdogan has been doing well in some of those earthquake-hit areas, and that might surprise a lot of people. It might surprise a lot of people. Indeed, I think the earthquake-hit area just voted for him. I mean, and while in the parliamentary election, the preference went to the, HDP or YSP party. But as a president, they do prefer Erdogan over Kılıçdaroğlu, because I think Erdogan has this charismatic, first of all, figure, and then he's very fast
in coping with the crisis, and he gave an immediate response to the crisis, and also he opened some, new temporary houses for the people that are still there affected by the earthquake. So that actually, from the international point of view, was a bit unexpected, because a lot of gossips they were out of the emergency was taken by the Turkish government. But at the end of the day, the response was very good.
Yusuf, what do you make of the whole issue of the earthquake recovery and how much that was on voters' minds?
It was definitely on voters' minds who were presiding in the earthquake zone. When we look at the earthquake February 6th and the immediate aftermath, the devastation across an area the size of a mid-sized European country like Bulgaria, or an Asian country like South Korea, a huge area impacted very, very quickly with 2 earthquakes, over 11 million people affected, just 50,000 dead, just staggering numbers, over 100,000 buildings, more 500,000 buildings either collapsed or damaged. So this rebuilding process was huge. The Turkish president tackled it head on. It made it his #1 priority. He even put off campaigning almost till just the last month till elections, because he was always in the earthquake zone. He was meeting with people from all the 11 provinces. Must have done at least 3 tours, if I remember correctly, to each one of those provinces to make sure everyone's okay. What do they need? What type of policies could he enact? And this was a big part of his pre-election policies that he was dealing with. And he just basically naturally flowed towards the campaign afterwards, and just the performance during the earthquake and the rebuilding process, getting these buildings up really, really quickly, the foundations, it's just not only did you see the reaction from the earthquake zone areas where he's getting 55, 60, 70% in some of these areas, it also probably helped him get votes in bigger areas, as well as the capital in Ankara and Istanbul, because many of these people in the earthquake zone had also left the other provinces as well. So those leaving, obviously seeing their homes being built, that definitely had a positive impact on them.
We'll talk about something that we haven't talked about at this point, but a very important issue, though, is security, the fight against terrorism. How big of an issue do you think that was, Valeria, in this election?
Well, it was quite a big issue. And I think, indeed, the opposition coalition was damaged by making a sort of alliance or getting the endorsement by HDP and the Yeşil Party. Because still, as the results show, the HDP can be considered as the political wing of PKK nowadays in Turkey. So there is still a sort of division light and a sort of fragile balance between being a political party, Kurdish-oriented, or just, acting as a political wing of PKK. And definitely from Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the fight against terrorism has been one of the key issues, starting from 2016, just right after the coup attempt, 15th of July, until nowadays. And we should understand that Turkey is also located in a very critical geographical area. So the border with difficult neighbors are very long. And also Turkey is suffering from the spillover effects of the terrorism coming from its own border. So this is, the stability of the country, as I said, it's very important. It's one of the key issues for the Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And we shouldn't neglect that the stability of Turkey means also stability of the region.
Yusuf, how do you figure that the whole issue of security and terrorism, and particularly where we are in the fight against PKK terrorists, how did that figure into people's minds in these elections?
I think it played a huge factor as well. I agree with Valeria. The HDP's outside support for the Nations Alliance and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was a central theme that Erdogan always touched upon. His national supporters, he was able to galvanize them. And I think that it was very, very important because it drew a very permanent line in the sand between the nationalist supporters. Many of them flocking to the People's Alliance. This is one of the reasons why I think MHP, with just about a week ago, which was polling 6%, is now in double digits tonight. I think that was one of the most important reasons why they were able to garner this vote, as considered as a bastion against terror. The MHP, just historically, from the Turkish understanding, it was able to take a lot of votes from the People's Alliance, from the E Party. It was polling 14, 15%, the E Party. Even though they performed better compared to 2018, they didn't perform as well as they were polling 2 weeks ago. So they were able to, at least he was able to get a lot of votes for his alliance partner through that rhetoric. So I definitely think the presence of the HDP, their support was very important for both sides. Kılıçdaroğlu was able to get a lot of votes in the southeast because of it. Erdogan was able to galvanize the nationalist vote around himself because of it. And both profited in different ways. Both candidates profited in different ways. And when we look at the national security policies right now, it's been quite a while. Turkey had been signaling another operation into Syria. That had been put off after the earthquake. So what's going to happen after elections? Obviously, an Erdogan victory would most likely could signal another operation into Syria. It could also signal sitting down at the table with the Assad regime. That's not evident yet. A Kılıçdaroğlu administration would most likely signal an end to the Syrian operations and probably direct normalization with Assad.
Let's talk a little bit more about foreign policy then, as it relates to Turkey and how Turkey's partners in the international community will be looking at these elections. What's your view on that, Valeria?
I think the international community is sort of divided into blocks. I mean, the West is just waiting and see, but I think they were about sort of optimistic towards Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu because his rhetoric was pretty much pro-West. I mean, he referred several times about getting close to NATO again, to European Union again, because the West is very important. While on the other side, we have the Muslim world and the Arab countries and also African countries. And yesterday I was pretty much surprised by reading a sort of letter penned out by some Islamic scholars all around the world, that they were just explaining why Turkish elections were important for them and for the entire world, because sort of Erdogan gave a voice to those people, and he gave a sort of accountability to the Muslim world. So I think from this side of the world, I mean from the Muslim Arab countries and so on, there was a pretty much endorsement for Erdogan. On the other side, the West would prefer, on the paper, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, but then I really believe that when it comes to the core issues that are on the table between European Union and Turkey, NATO and Turkey, then also Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu would have made, I mean, some compromises, because those are matters of national interest rather than political propaganda, I do believe.
Yusuf, where do you see the international implications of all of this right now?
Well, when we look at the potential foreign policy of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu versus the foreign policy of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, now Erdogan more of a multipolarist. He really likes to balance the relations between the East and the West, and he's done a very good job of it. Especially, we can see that he's been able to create diplomatic space to play a mediator role between Ukraine and Russia. I think that's a very important role that he has played, and the world has seen benefits from his diplomacy there. He's also in the near region. He always has a forward deployed diplomatic posture, especially not afraid to. As his foreign minister always says, we're strong in the field and we're strong at the table, and it's a very Clausewitz view towards foreign policy, being able to have your diplomacy and your foreign ministry working very closely with your defense ministry in areas where there is chaos and instability across your borders, most namely Syria and Iraq. So the Turkish president would most likely continue these policies. Same thing with the Caucasus in the north, in the Black Sea, in the Eastern Mediterranean as well. Now, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, we would probably see a much more Western-aligned foreign policy. We'd probably see better relations with Washington on some issues, but I don't think on all core issues, because There are some red lines for Turkey that Washington wants to see Turkey give up on, and those are not something that any single one leader or individual could do.
Talk a little about those red lines. What are the red
Well,
lines?
some of the red lines right now, obviously, what's going on in Syria. When we look at Syria, the United States has partnered up with the YPG, a group that Turkey views as terrorists. Now, this is a group that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has not given a definite view on. He hasn't given a definite identification yet on the YPG, but this is something that is basically a Turkish state policy. This is not really open for interpretation. Creating an autonomous region for a group that is a national security threat is not really open for interpretation. So this is something that he would be restricted on not being able to do. So that would be a red line that he wouldn't be able to meet. What are other red lines? Other red lines are Cyprus, Northern Cyprus, for example. This is not just a U.S. issue. This is more of an EU issue. But the issue of Northern Cyprus reunifying the island, or withdrawing Turkish troops from the island. This is, again, not something that a Turkish president can make. This is not a decision that a Turkish president can make. This is a state policy. This is a policy for 50 years. This is a policy that will continue. This is a policy that is beyond an individual.
Valeria, you were nodding in agreement to some of that. You see it the same way with these red lines?
And I really believe that actually Turkey as a sort of free rider also within NATO is not so much not compatible with NATO principles. I mean, because this sort of strategic autonomy of Ankara, it's legitimated by the fact that Ankara is located in a very difficult position. And I do not see any incompatibility on that. But what I would like to remark that the West, I mean, European Union, at the end of the day, they have to understand and they have to start a genuine brainstorming. What do they want really from Turkey, despite Erdogan or Kılıçdaroğlu? Because they also within the European Union, there are certain issues that we need to solve. And as Yusuf mentioned before, the Cyprus issues, first of all. And then again, Turkey is a candidate member to be a full member of European Union, but to some extent has been treated as a third country. When now it comes the refugees deals and some other like sectorial agreement. So, yeah.
I'm cutting you off, but you know what's really interesting? I always wonder how this would play out. Kılıçdaroğlu's policy now for the EU, migration, refugees, very, very important. Turkey had played a very important role signing the migration deal with the European Union. But now, in the event that these refugees are returned to Syria or normalization with Assad happens, what's going to happen to the 6 million Syrians that are living right across the Turkish border who can turn into refugees at any minute or irregular migrants at any minute if a renewed offensive starts? And also the 3.5 million that he would want to return now. On one side, he wants to have very good relations with the European Union, and he would have very good relations on certain issues. But for Europe, this is a core security issue, migration. And returning those 3.5 million refugees and also withdrawing the Turkish presence from northern Syria, that's going to create quite a problem with the European Union, I think. I think that's going to be a prioritized problem for Brussels going forward. And it's not as easy as saying, okay, his policies are Western, more West-aligned, when you have a core issue that you're going to fall on opposite sides with Brussels. So that would be interesting.
It's not a problem that's going to go away, is it?
No.
Regardless of who's in power, and of course, given Turkey's geographical position in all of this.
Definitely.
All right. Just before we remind you of where we stand on this, I just want to ask you you guys one final question. We have been talking a lot about how close this race is tonight. How does this come? And this is the toughest test that Erdogan has had to face at this point. How does this compare with the previous election in 2018? You think?
I think the most difficult point, it was made the so-called table of six, because the coalition, Kılıçdaroğlu is leading a coalition of 6 different parties. So this is a big challenge for Erdogan. That was a big challenge for Erdogan. And moreover, the earthquake. The time was very interesting. I think Erdogan showed his strength again. He took the challenge and he went over it.
All right, we're going to leave it there for now. Thank you very much to both of you, our editor-at-large, Yusuf Erem, and Valeria Gianotta, director of CSPI's Observatory, for your in-depth analysis. Thank you very much to both of you. All right, just remind you of where we are right now, just very quickly, with 95% of the votes cast. Erdogan leading with about 49. There you see on the bottom of your screen, 49.7% of the vote, with the Nation Alliance with Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu at 44%. So still very, very close at this point, with the possibility of a runoff, as we've been discussing, likely at this point. Good to have you with us here on TRT, and that is, as I said, 95% of the votes cast. And in terms of where we're going to go next, I believe it's going to be... We're going to go...
It is over to us. You're watching our continuing coverage of TRT World's special coverage of Turkey's crucial dual presidential and parliamentary elections. Now, we have been on air for more than 8 hours. Vote counting has been going on for about 6.5 hours. We have yet to announce a winner. If we do not have a winner in the first round, we will be heading off to a runoff in 2 weeks' time. If we are going to have a winner tonight, one of the two leading candidates, whether it's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan or his main contender, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, needs to get 50% of the vote plus 1 vote. Adnan.
Okay, so the question coming to you is, why don't we have a winner already? But before you answer that, have a look at the numbers. Hazem just gave them to you. So rather than repeat what you can see here on the screen, I just want to give you an indication of how much has changed since we gave numbers 4 hours ago. Because 4 hours ago, 51.1% was the share of the vote for Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It doesn't seem like that much of a fall, but when you look at where Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was 4 hours ago and where he's come up to, then that shows that there is a serious impact on the votes that are being counted in favor of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, because 4 hours ago, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was on 43.2%. And they seem little, those numbers, but when you combine them with a little bit of a fall for Recep Tayyip Erdogan and then a little bit of the rise, or a slightly bigger rise for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, those two numbers together seem to have made a big difference in terms of we're looking as if we may not get a winner outright in the first round. And it was looking as if that would be Erdogan, but now it's looking unlikely.
Okay, if we're in a 100-meter dash, we're in the last 5 meters, so we're going into a photo finish. Right now, when I look at the numbers, just waiting for that live bug to actually refresh itself, the presidential vote, 95.1% of the vote, or the ballots rather. It's important to actually make that distinction.
Correct.
The ballots have been counted. Now, one of the reasons which could be in terms of the slow information coming to Anadolu Agency, which is the state-run news agency, which we have to report as a public broadcaster, is that maybe there are some contentions of particular ballots in terms of the final results that are being reported to the Supreme Election Council.
So in other words, parties are contesting those results as they're revealed from the ballot box.
That seems to be my best guess. I mean, having covered nearly about a half a dozen elections, it usually comes down, if there's a delay, if there's a slowing down of numbers, it means that there is a problem, or I shouldn't say a problem. Some parties are contesting the official result, and we don't know which party is contesting what and what the outcome will be. So it could be a very long night for us.
Yeah, you can understand why the Election Council would do that, because obviously if there's going to be some sort of challenge, they want to make sure that their numbers are right before they publish anything. But it was 21 GMT, which is midnight in Turkey. We were expecting the Election Council to announce a winner of the presidency, and now we're, 1 hour and 15 minutes after that. But let's just turn our attention just briefly to Sinan Oğan. You've been talking to a lot of guests who say that he, the ultra-nationalist who is representing the right-wing ATA alliance, has outperformed himself.
Indeed, and I think it's one of the main reasons why we're not seeing any of the main presidential candidates, whether it's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan or his main challenger, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of the CHP. It is because of Sinan Oğan getting more than 5% that we're not seeing any of these two candidates pass that 50% threshold. It is a good performance by the nationalists, not only by Sinan Oğan, but also by the MHP in the parliamentary elections as well. Keep in mind that we're keeping a very close eye on two elections.
What's really interesting is that we haven't had any indication from the Election Council about when they may have a definitive result. So the entire country is simply in a moment of stasis almost. They're celebrating out there, but they don't know whether they're going to be able to celebrate once the result comes through.
Look, what's happening is that both President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the leader of the ruling AK Party, as well as Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of the CHP, they're both urging the ballot observers who are been designated by the party to actually take control or actually own their vote, to stay as long as you can, make sure that the numbers that come out reflect the will of the people. So, when it comes down to this, it's going to be a long night.
It's going to be really interesting, Maria, to see how many of those supporters at those two-party HQs are going to remain on those streets waving their flags and shouting at the top of their voices.
Absolutely, Adnan. And we've seen incredible images just a while ago of AK Party supporters there in Ankara. And I believe we also saw the motorcade of the president himself there in Ankara. Let's take you to the Turkish capital. And Jafar Hussein is live there for us outside the incredible presidential complex there. And we're at this incredible moment, right, aren't we, Jafar, where neither presidential candidate has reached that all-important 50% threshold to declare outright victory in the first round. It is looking increasingly like we're going to a second round. Is the country ready for this? Is it used to this? Is there appetite for a second round or a runoff, as it's called?
Well, indeed, Maria, it looks very likely that we are headed towards a runoff, but make no mistake, the diaspora votes could change the game. The vote counting is underway, as we know, and the diaspora vote could be a possible game changer here, but as you said, it looks very likely that we are heading towards a runoff. Let me also remind our audience what statements have been made by the Supreme Election Council here in Turkey. According to the Supreme Election Council, the vote counting process is underway in a smooth fashion. In fact, there have been statements made by both the incumbent Turkish president, also opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and both have basically called on their supporters to stay on top of the ballots until the vote counting process is finished. When it will be finished, well, we don't have an answer to that. We are all waiting for the Supreme Election Council to announce the final results, but certainly nail-biting moments here. And Maria, just about 10 to 15 minutes ago, we saw a huge convoy of cars passing by the presidential complex. I believe that was the convoy of the Turkish president, who is in the Turkish capital, Ankara. And from what we know right now, he is at AK Party's headquarters in Ankara. So let's go straight to AK Party's headquarters, where Andrew Hopkins joins me now live. So Andrew, the supporters there must be very happy to see the Turkish president.
Well, I imagine they will be when they get to see him. He's actually arrived at the back of the building, so they haven't managed to get sight of him yet. But obviously, I think a lot of them waiting to see if he's going to come out onto the balcony and make a speech, as he has done at previous elections when he has managed to actually win the election. Of course, the result at the moment here still in some doubt as to what is going to happen. We're still waiting for that final tally to come. At the moment, it suggests like we're looking at a runoff between Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu in 2 weeks' time. But certainly the numbers here as well in this area behind me at the AK Party in probably the last hour or so have picked up a little. And I think many people have probably got wind of the fact that the president was on his way here and likely to make a speech. So a lot of people have now turned out, more than certainly earlier on in the evening. And there are people outside of this yard at the AK Party headquarters also sort of cramming around the gates and the entrance areas as well to get a look at what's going to happen. So I think a lot of people here waiting to hear what the president's going to have to say about the results so far.
Indeed, all eyes on Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's speech. And Andrew, I mean, as we have been talking, it looks very likely that we are headed towards a runoff, but again, too early to say anything definitive at this point, as things could change, as diaspora votes could totally change the game. In terms of the possibility of all of this going into a runoff, did you get the opportunity to speak to any of AK Party's supporters about how confident they are that their president is going to win if this goes into a runoff? Because from what I can see right behind you, they appear to be quite confident.
Exactly. From what we've found out from people, they think that the president would win in the second round of a contest, because when you look at the election system that Turkey has at the moment, we have the parliamentary results today as well, and they don't go into a runoff. There's actually a final result today in the parliamentary elections, and the votes there suggest that the President's Alliance, the People's Alliance, will have a majority in Parliament. And if we go to a runoff in 2 weeks' time, as the figures show at the moment, you could then have a situation where I think the President would likely to say to people, why would you vote for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu when my party, my colleagues in the other parties, we are now in control of Parliament, why would you vote for somebody else from the other side of the political spectrum? Because of the sort of the tension this would cause and the problems it would cause in trying to run Parliament alongside the presidency as well. And I think that will probably be one of the main planks of his campaign in the next 2 weeks if we see that run-up. And I think a lot of people know this here, that these are the kinds of difficulties this would raise. And they're also very confident in his abilities. The people here who come to sort of wait to see the president, sort of to wave flags and chant about the AK Party, these are people who are not, I would say, really have much doubt about where their political sympathies lie and who the best person for the country is.
All right, Andrew Hopkins, live for us from AK Party's headquarters. Thank you very much indeed for that update. And I guess another reason why supporters of AK Party are celebrating right now is because in terms of parliamentary votes, AK Party's alliance is in the lead. So that could be another reason why these folks are celebrating right now. Remember, there are 600 seats in the parliament, and it looks like AK Party's alliance, the People's Alliance, is all set to get more than 300 seats. All right, now let's go to Istanbul and speak to TRT World's Muttalip Erdogan. Muttalip, about an hour ago, I saw scenes of celebrations in Istanbul around AK Party's camp. Are celebrations still underway over there? And if so, why exactly are people celebrating? Because we do not have a definitive winner right now.
Absolutely, Jafar, as you have been reporting as well from Ankara, right in front of the presidential complex, that people have now the expectation of the winning in the second round for the May 28th elections, because the ruling party, the People's Alliance, were in fact still the leading in the May the 14th elections, tonight's elections, even though they still couldn't pass the 50% mark. They are quite confident that the third candidate, Sinan Oğan, will be in the same alliance with Recep Tayyip Erdogan as well as the MHP party. Then their expectation here in Istanbul from the people, we hear that the ruling party, the alliance, Recep Tayyip Erdogan's alliance, will pass the 55% mark, which will give them a clear victory in the next 2 weeks. And of course, people were waiting outside of the AK Parti's Istanbul headquarters. There was a flow of thousands of cars, causing a jam-packed traffic in Istanbul streets. And also, we've also witnessed at the location where you are now, we have a convoys of cars coming to presidential complex to greet for the victory for the President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, even though we still do not have a clear winner who passed the 50% mark in the elections.
Right, and Muttalib, also help us understand, how has Istanbul as a province voted traditionally in the past? I remember back in 2018, President Erdogan won in Istanbul with around 50% of the vote, while his rival at the time, Muharrem İnce, was at around 36%. But is that always been the case with Istanbul, or Istanbul is a swing state and any of the party can win?
Well, Jafar, it used to be, as we have been saying, that there is this clear saying in the Turkish politics that whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey. But in this case, unfortunately, it doesn't really apply for today. And of course, the CHP had the majority of the votes, which is, again, with the slim margin, which is about over 49%, while the ruling party, AK Party, was just over 46% in Istanbul. But again, for this election, even though the Nations Alliance actually won Istanbul, they couldn't pass the 50% mark, even though they were quite confident with the table of 6 plus the Green Left Party as well. So people are still waiting the ruling party to run for another 5-year term, even though the main opposition party won Istanbul's election. And again, I also like to mention that, again, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has his political career started in Istanbul. He's been casting his vote in Istanbul for the last 15 years. Of course, his party had quite a disappointment when they lost the municipality elections in the previous elections for the municipality voting as well. But again, whoever wins the election will have the majority in the seats, and that's really applied for the elections. As you have said, the ruling party had the 300 seats mark. They have the 326 seats secured for the elections, which is also a surprise for when we speak to people and experts as well, because people were expecting President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his alliance to win the presidential post, but they were expecting a lower seats, the number of seats in the parliament. But in this case, and tonight, we have seen the opposite.
All right, welcome back to our studios here in Istanbul. Let's remind our viewers who have been with us for the better part of 8 hours some of the messages that have been coming out from the leadership. We're going to start off with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In a tweet, he said that the positive atmosphere surrounding the elections shows that the country's points to the country's democratic maturity. He also called on his supporters to protect the ballot boxes until the results are finalized. And the fact that Turkey's elections took place in the form of a great feast of democracy in peace and tranquility is an expression of the democratic maturity of our country. As the vote counting is still going on, trying to announce results prematurely is a expression of the national will. We are pleased that the vote count reflects the favor of the nation. I ask all of my supporters to stay at the ballot boxes no matter what until the results are finalized. I congratulate all my citizens who voted in the name of democracy and who worked on the election effort, and I express my gratitude to each and every one of them. All right, I'm now joined on the set by Vehbi Baysan, who's an associate professor of history over at Ibn Haldun University, and Taha Meli Arvas, who's an adjunct professor of finance at Boğaziçi University. Gentlemen, it's a long night. It looks like it's going to be a long night. More than 95% of the votes have been counted. it seems we're on sort of a pause mode. What do you think this could be because of?
So I think there are two factors. One, 95% of the ballot boxes appear to have been voted, so there may be a discrepancy between that and the actual number of votes. And more importantly, the millions of votes cast by Turks living abroad have yet to be counted. So frankly, as the president himself tweeted there, it's anyone's election at this point. It appears to be premature to say that this one party or the other won, or one candidate or the other candidate won. But so far, it looks like it's heading towards a runoff.
Bepi Baysan, is it going to a runoff?
Well, still there are a few million votes uncounted. So obviously this can, probably we can speculate that it goes for a runoff, or those votes would have a significant impact in either way, you see. So it's, in my view, we would never know whether President Erdogan would kind of get 50% plus one vote, or Kılıçdaroğlu would get. So because it's that important that you have, we don't know, but it's speculated again that up to 10 million votes uncounted, they're saying, but even half of it would have that kind of an impact. So therefore, it is somewhere in a very critical proportion.
The fact that Sinan Oğan is receiving more than 5% of the vote, it is the prime reason why we are in the situation currently, right?
Right. The third-party candidate is the issue here. That is the reason why no one's getting over 50%. And as Professor said, it's anyone's election at this point. Technically, all possibilities are still a possibility, even at this late hour. So it doesn't look like we're going to know until all those millions of votes are counted.
And then what's going to happen is that the Supreme Election Council will actually post the results, and then there could be a period of contention. But I think on the 19th of May is when they have to ratify the election results of the first round. I think we've got to go back to the big story, and I'll get to the parliament in just a bit, but I'm wondering what you think is some of the reasons why we're seeing a better than expected vote results for not only Sinan Oğan, but also the nationalists as well, because the MHP in the parliamentary elections was polling at around maybe 7 to 8%. It's outperformed this by at least 2 points, and it's in double digits right now. What do you think is some of the reasons behind that?
That's a good question. I mean, economically, my finance is my expertise here, so people are looking for ways to express their lack of satisfaction with the economic situation. That's how I read that, and they're looking for ways to express that, and it's by voting for these parties that have voiced their opposition to increased immigration or things like that.
Okay, since you say economics is your area of expertise,
Right.
and I know that very well, President Erdogan in the 2018 elections, he got 52.6% of the vote. Currently, he's about maybe 3 points behind, 3 percentage points.
Right.
Is perhaps the economy the main reason why he has lost 3 percentage points, or perhaps other things?
I mean, I think incumbents globally are most at risk of losing when the economy is not doing as great as they had wanted to. People vote with their pocketbooks. This is something it's
all about the economy, stupid.
Exactly. As James Carville said in '92, that's what people are focusing on, and that's the same thing here. That's going to be the same thing for Biden if he goes up against Trump in a year and a half here, for whoever is running anywhere. This global economic situation we have now, and potentially the greatest recession that the world will experience in the next 6 months to a year, is what will decide the fate of many politicians in these coming elections, including President Erdogan here.
Bepi Baysan, let me ask you this.
Before you ask, let me comment on that. One of our politicians said that no government can stand against an empty pan. So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
If they cannot cook their food, and if they cannot feed themselves, the government's always at stake. That's so, yeah, sorry.
Going back to Sinan Oğan and the nationalists' performance, do you feel that perhaps the AK Party's, I'm not going to say partnership, but sort of talking with Hüdapar and possibly the CHP getting the tacit support of the former HDP or the Yeşil Sol maybe pushed more voters towards the third party candidate? This could have had an effect.
Well, definitely. I mean, that also a clear demonstration that the voters in Turkey probably expecting more than what AKP and CHP or the coalitions are representing or presenting. Like, for example, I heard a lot that, yes, I like to vote for Kılıçdaroğlu, but I don't like what he said about Syrians here because he wants to send them back to Syria. Because we know, I'm studying Middle East history, we know for a fact that many of these Syrians have no place to go back in Syria. Even if the regime gave assurances, they don't trust the regime there. So where are you going to send them? So I heard this a lot, including from my colleagues and all the rest of it. So I think these are important issues because when you have these populist policies, that you may also jeopardize your position in the society. So I think Sinan Oğan's 5% may well be representing this one. That does not necessarily represent that we have kind of a tendency towards going more radical Turkish nationalism or so. So I don't think so. But probably also young voters, we have 5-6 million of them now, like including my son today for the first time. We went together and he voted. Maybe seeing a young face, a young man, I'm sorry, probably I shouldn't say that, but compared to other leadership, because, many young men didn't see any other leadership in Turkey in the last 20 years. That may have an impact as well. So I think this should be all on table, and because the world is changing and it's changing very fast. And therefore, party politics got to change quick enough to respond the expectations of citizens. So that's, I think, valid everywhere, not only in Turkey. And what I realized with my students at university and also when I observed the high school ones, they're really clear. They want to see something else. They don't know what it is, but something different. Something that probably talking more about climate change, talking more about other things, because a lot of these old traditional discourse probably may mean something for my generation, but certainly doesn't mean much for the younger ones. This is to say that the Kurdish issue you have there, like for them, they didn't experience this. Why we have this issue? They don't have much. You see what I mean? So I think that also signifies this election that young voters are very different, certainly different than us, and their expectations are different.
Let me ask you something about Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. With him having a Alevi heritage. I remember, I think it was about maybe 2.5 weeks ago when he posted something on Twitter saying that I'm an Alevi. And I remember it got huge traction, more than, I think, 70 million views. I think some outlets were reporting that it was perhaps the most viewed video on Twitter. Looking at how he is performing tonight, do you feel that he, despite being viewed 70 million times on Twitter, we don't know what that is, it could be positive or negative, but he's had a difficult time in terms of selling the idea of his non-traditional background, especially when you look at sort of the composition of the Turkish society, and voters have had difficulty in accepting that?
Well, what I can say is that I'm a graduate of Istanbul University, my undergraduate studies, but also nearby coffee shop. This is to say that this coffee shop culture I still continue on, and that is the view my coffee shop friends actually share. They said that him kind of expressing his views on Alevi, which is like a non-Sunni faith or path of belief, would fire back. And that came as a surprise to me, because I was very happy to see, because Turkey is a very multicultural society, And here we live together. We don't realize my neighbor is Alevi or not, or this or that. So, but I was surprised to hear my friends are saying that, at least discussing in the coffee shop, you know, the Turkish coffee shop culture. But so, but the reactionary votes seems that for some around me believing that Kılıçdaroğlu should not have said that, and others are believing, well, this may boost his votes because he openly declares who he is, and he doesn't need to, you know, it's not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed. So why not? He's expressing his view on that. Because probably for our viewers who are not familiar with the Alevis, is that, you know, since the establishment of Republic, we don't have see any problem with them, or at least the Turkish authorities since 1920s. So they're like peaceful citizens like anybody else. But I cannot really comprehend the cultural reaction I am told that exists in Anatolia could have kind of lessened Kılıçdaroğlu's votes, but I'm not sure.
Talking about lessening a particular candidate's votes, I want to talk about Meral Akşener and the E Party. For the better part, or actually for more than a year, it's been dubbed as the Table of Six. You had Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and leaders of political parties on right of the spectrum. 4 weeks out, Meral Akşener walked out from this table. And it was at that moment when I think a lot of people in Turkey said the race is over, that President Erdogan would win. Right. But how strange politics is, in a strange twist of fate, I think within 36 hours, Meral Akşener was able to come back to the Table of Six, accepting the joint nomination of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu for the nation's alliance. I'm wondering if how much damage this caused to Meral Akşener and the E Party, and if they've been able to recover from that so short of a time frame out from these elections.
I think her perspective was that one of the mayors of the larger cities, Istanbul and Ankara, Ekrem İmamoğlu and Mansur Yavaş, would have been a better candidate. That's what her argument was. She wanted to see Ekrem İmamoğlu, specifically her candidate, run against President Erdogan here. He's much younger than Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. He's a charismatic guy. We were on a broadcast several years ago during the municipality election, and I said this guy is a very charismatic politician, and he looks like he will have a long future in Turkish politics. That's what Meral Akşener was also arguing at that meeting, and she kind of implied that there's no way that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu could win. And then she walked it back, and then, like you said, 36 hours later, she walked it back, and she said no, she supports his nomination. That, I think, did strike a blow to her parliamentary performance. We see the E parties at approximately 10% the last I checked, where they were projecting 20%. Yeah. So I think they were hurt by that, and maybe the third-party nationalists took a lot of votes away from them as well. So it's this flip-floppy version of her beliefs or commentary that may have done a lot of damage, as you said.
In 2017, President Erdogan spearheaded a referendum to move from a parliamentarian system to an executive presidential system. And I think one of the main arguments that he had made at the time was that looking at Turkey's political past, that it had suffered a lot because of coalitions. This is an undeniable fact. We've seen this in the 70s, we've seen this in the 80s, in the 90s as well. So that, I can totally understand that logic. But when you look at what's happening with alliances, isn't it just another way of calling it this a coalition? Because we are seeing the AK Party partner up with the MHP. We are seeing them partner up with the BBP and the YRP, and the same thing goes for the Nations Alliance as well. So it's just calling one thing by a different name. Is that not?
I mean, I think going back to the James Carville analysis here, Bill Clinton didn't get 50% of the vote against George Bush, the first George Bush. Ross Perot is the one who gave Bill Clinton the presidency. It was thanks to his third-party candidacy that allowed Bill Clinton to become president. So similarly, we have the situation where the third-party candidate here, Sinan Oğan, literally said yesterday that after this election, he would look for both sides to come to him and negotiate a deal where he got something in return. These are his words. So we might see a coalition of sorts in the coming days if this election isn't decided tonight, if we actually go to a runoff, and there will be a potential coalition. Getting 50% or more than 50% is very difficult. I think in the United States in the last 100 years, only 4 elections or only 3 times were first-time candidates able to get 50% in the first round. So it's very difficult. That's true. However, the counter-argument is you want a president who represents at least half of the country.
Yeah.
I understand that completely. But
I'm going to get to that in a bit because President Erdogan made some interesting comments about 30 hours ago, right before the broadcast ban came into effect. But Vehbi, when you look at what's likely to happen in the next 2 weeks, Taha was alluding to there's going to be a lot of horse trading going on. During this horse trading, what do you think is going to be some of the common denominators? What is Sinan Oğan going to be looking at in terms of when he goes to President Erdogan? Tell me, is it just position or is it policy and principle?
Well, I think the current situation demonstrates that it's a melting pot, that we need something new in Turkish politics. More than one thing, of course. As we can see now, probably take Kılıçdaroğlu, CHP and İYİ Parti, Meral Akşener, probably in a good times they will be competing against each other. So you're talking about Turkish nationalism represented by 3 parties. You have the İYİ Parti with Kılıçdaroğlu, but other part, Sinan Oğan, what do you call it?
Technically an independent candidate, but obviously coming from a nationalist background.
But also you see that MHP in coalition with Mr. Erdogan. So what I'm trying to say is that in the past, when you're talking about Turkish nationalism, it was represented by MHP, and that was enough. When you're talking about a more Islamist party, that you had one Refah Partisi, but then because these parties couldn't do the necessary changes, then you keep having these offsprings. Now, what we see is that offsprings of offsprings. So it's very interesting times. But nevertheless, it's possible to say that if we go for another 2 weeks, which will be very tough for everyone, including ordinary citizens, because I know my students don't want to talk about anything else. They just want to talk about politics and what's going to happen. Probably we will see more alliances. But these alliances represent the ideologies melting in one pot and then coming up, presenting themselves how different they are from the others, or how they're trying to cover all the corners in the political sphere. So probably after these elections, let's say in 5 years' time or 4 years' time, we will have probably different parties or different candidates. But here what we see also is that President Erdogan representing himself as a strong candidate, whereas on the others, the parties are in coalition. Yeah. So he's a stronger candidate over there, but on the other hand, his opponents are coming in as a more organized party level. So I think in 2 weeks, it will be very interesting to see what coalitions will be formed, also who will be going with Mr. Erdogan or who will be going with Kılıçdaroğlu. But we may have, which I really suspect in a positive way, that very sudden surprises.
Okay, I just want to sort of remind our viewers where we stand in terms of the latest numbers, because we do have an update. If we can actually bring that up onto the screen. Yes, more than 96% of the votes counted, 96.1% of the ballots counted. I'm sorry.
Ballot boxes.
Yeah. Ballot boxes. I know that it's an important distinction to make. President Erdogan has received more than 26 million votes. His share of the votes is 49.4. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, just over 23.6 million. He is inching closer to 45 as we speak. But the only constant that has been throughout the night is that of Sinan Oğan. He hasn't dipped below 5.3. He hasn't surpassed 5.4. Gentlemen, let me ask you one last question. We know that President Erdogan is in Ankara. We were expecting him to stay in Istanbul, where he cast his ballot. We know that he is in Ankara. He is at AK Party headquarters. he is expected to make some sort of speech. What could this speech look like?
I think if he has exit poll numbers from from Turks who voted abroad, and if he has exit poll numbers from the remaining votes, he could potentially call it here, call a victory. I think that might be premature at this stage.
And Sinan Oğan actually has come out and said that I would strongly
recommend not doing that.
Not recommend any of the candidates to actually make a pirate a premature
And I think the CHP leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu said something similar. He didn't call a victory for himself either. I think it's too early to call at this hour for anyone, frankly. It could be anyone's election. So I think if the president comes out and makes a speech tonight, it may be something like, let's wait for all the votes to be counted. Let's not have anyone rush into a conclusion. That's what I would assume, but obviously, that's just my guess.
Well, I agree. I don't think we don't expect something really concrete, but I think all the candidates should come up, especially like Mr. Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu and even Sinan Oğan, to assure that we are all living in Turkey and no one's position or place in this country, whoever wins, will be jeopardized. I think that's what people really nervous about it, that after 20 years of supporting Erdogan, if he loses, what happens to us? I think that's the biggest worry, that whoever it is, I mean, both Mr. Erdogan and as well as Kılıçdaroğlu, because they're the strongest candidates, should assure people. I think that's what people are expecting rather than the victory, because we can see the tension, especially the last week or two, growing towards that direction, because one of the theories that oppositions never came this close to winning, and Mr. Erdogan never came to this close to losing, possibly. So now that's why I think we see the votes at that level.
But I think one fair way to describe it is that this has been a feast of a democracy.
Oh, yeah.
Vehbi and Taha, thank you very much for the moment.
Thank you very much.
I think that we'll be seeing each other a little bit later on in the show, but thank you very much. So we have had a close look at how the presidential race stands, but what has been happening with the parliamentary elections. Let's get an update on that from our Adnan Nawaz. Adnan, how's it looking like?
Yeah, really interesting because, as you're right to point out with your guests, with Taha and Vehbi, the presidential contest seems to be going right down to the wire. But in terms of the parliamentary contest, over the past couple of hours, these numbers have been pretty steady. So have a look here. We've just broken it down into the main parties rather than the alliances. But when we look at these parties' projections, or what they've got at the moment in terms of 52 million votes counted, 268 seats for Recep Tayyip Erdogan's AK Party, his allies in the MHP with 51 seats. As I say, literally in the past couple of hours, those numbers have only changed by 1 MP. The CHP of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, which is allied with the E Party, they're also steady. The YSP, formerly the HDP, has been slowly on the rise since counting began. But there, on the extreme right of your screen, when you see 8 other MPs, 5 of those come from the YRP, which is a party which is also allied with the AK Party and the MHP. So those 5 seats could make a difference, although at the moment, if this stays the same as it has pretty much for the past few hours, definitely the People's Alliance is going to have a majority in Parliament. Just 2 numbers to look out for. Out of 600 deputies, 360 needed to overturn an executive order from the president. 400 MPs are needed to change the constitution. That was something that the CHP said, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu said he would like to do if he became president, go back to the former parliamentary system. But if these numbers stay pretty similar, that won't happen, not in terms of the numbers that they need of MPs to back them in that desire. Yash, over to you.
Okay, Adnan, moving from the numbers to the psyche of Turkish voters. To discuss that, I'm joined in studio by Özden Zeynep Oktav. She's a professor at the Department of International Relations at Istanbul Medeniyet University. Hi there, Özden. My colleague Alican, along with Vehbi and Taha, discussed such a broad conversation there. So I want to look at how Turkish people vote. What do they look at, and what kind of lines are drawn when they go to the polls?
You ask about their preferences, voting preferences, or
yes, when they head to the polls,
Yes.
what are they thinking of? Traditionally, is it along ideological lines, or are they the very pertinent issues facing the country at the moment? So 5 years ago, security would have been very high because of the terror attacks in Turkey, but now the economy and the earthquakes are something that people are looking at.
Yes. As I mentioned before, the current agenda is very much about the earthquake and inflation. But as far as I understand, when I look at the score, generally speaking, people are, the electorate of AKP more nationalistic, getting more nationalistic rather than Islamist priorities. For example, at the beginning of the 2000s, the headscarf was very on the agenda of Turkey, and the young ladies trying to have a university education were not allowed to go in because they were covering their heads, and this was a big problem. But right now there is no more such a big problem for the women, whether they are Islamist or not. This problem faded away, disappeared.
And do many of those young women then still feel very loyal to President Erdogan and the AK Party for ensuring that they have those rights at schools and in the workplace and in the country?
Loyal, yes, maybe we can say loyal, but they feel this is a feeling of gratitude, in my opinion, because this was a big problem, sociological, political, big problem, and a lot of people were migrating from the small places to the cities to have university education, but they were not allowed to have this education because of the headscarf. This was a big problem. But now this problem was, thanks to God and thanks to the AKP government, disappeared and was solved. But now the problem is mostly economics, and the generally speaking, on international level, all over the world, there is an economic stagnation, recession. But in Turkey, inflation is getting worse and worse, and together with earthquake, and this became very important had a very negative impact on the votes of the people. So as far as I see, people also tries to cope with this economic problem, which one is more important, if you ask me, economics or politics or foreign security in foreign politics, etc. In my opinion, I think that the people gives importance to security. And as I mentioned a little while ago, independency in foreign politics. Earthquake also proved that the people are very much united regardless of their ideological differences. And the earthquake also had a very big negative impact on Turkish economy, just like the refugee issue, just like the fight against YPG and ISIS, and just like pandemic. All these had big negative effect on economics, and therefore I will repeat maybe, but the scores of the AKP is big success of President Erdogan. This is my personal view, but I believe a lot of people agree with me.
Results, yes. But in those earthquake zones, have they traditionally been, if we look at 2018, were most of those 11 affected provinces voting for President Erdogan's alliance? Because it seems right now that area was swayed a bit more towards the CHP from some of the numbers that we're seeing.
Yes. For example, I'm very much surprised by the election results in Hatay. In Hatay, CHP, the mayorship is CHP as far as I know, and the people in Hatay mostly are pro-CHP. But after the earthquake, people voted. If the scores did not change, I'm not that much sure, but people voted AKP. And this proves that the AKP worked well, efficiently in the earthquake zone. In Maraş, I think, in Adıyaman also, AKP had the majority of the votes. And these are the earthquake zone, and people suffered a lot. But the government and the state served people in earthquake zone very well, and therefore they voted the government.
And many people maybe in those areas and across other parts of the country would be thinking that in order for those earthquake zones to recover, you need a continuation of the current administration.
Maybe, yes, you're right, the continuation. But I believe that even if the government changed, these policies should continue because we have no other
President,
option.
I'm so sorry to have to cut you off, but we want to take our viewers live to Ankara, where the Turkish president, I believe, is going to address that crowd of supporters very shortly. He was in Istanbul, he has flown now to Ankara. Outside the presidential complex, I believe, waving there, of course, to the thousands of supporters. And despite it being 2 o'clock in the morning here in Turkey, people still, of course, watching this election incredibly closely. Many in the camp would have hoped for a first-round victory there for President Erdogan. At this stage, really too close to call. Not all those ballots have been counted. We could be headed to a second round, a runoff on the 28th of May. He's standing there alongside his wife, the First Lady, Emine Erdogan, waving at the many supporters that support the AK Party in coalition with the People's Alliance. Let's listen to what he has to say. He's yet to make any comments at this stage, but he does seem to be joining in the crowds singing outside that presidential complex alongside his wife there, Emine Erdogan. More than 96% of the votes have been counted. Let's listen to what he has to say.
This is the result of this love. This is the meeting of the lovers. Today we are celebrating the results of this marathon. Some of them are in the kitchen and we are in the balcony.
Maşallah. Aziz milletim.
My august nation.
Ekranları başında bizleri izleyen kıymetli vatandaşlarım.
Dear citizens who watch us in front of their TV screens, dear citizens of Ankara, dear friends at cause, I would like to greet you all wholeheartedly with love, respect and affection.
Ülkemiz 14 Mayıs seçimleriyle
our country
demokrasi şölenini de alnının akıyla
has experienced another festival of democracy with the 14th of May elections.
kesin sonuçlar belli olmamakla beraber
Although the final results are not there yet, we are leading in the elections.
hem yurt içi oyların gayri resmi sonuçlarının belli olmasının hem
The unofficial results
biraz daha vakit alacağı anlaşılıyor.
have been
Tabii biz
announced, but it seems that the votes counted abroad will take some time to be announced officially. However, there are some politicians who are claiming that they are leading in the election, so we are not like those people who are trying to deceive our nation.
biz milletimize karşı hep
We have always been honest and sincere towards our nation, and even today we know that we are leading far away in the elections. However, we don't know the final results, and since the final results are not announced officially, we are expecting the reflection of the national will. As we have been waiting for the final results, the official results, we once again organized our traditional balcony speech in order to meet with all of you. What a love this is, what an excitement this is, what a love this is.
Sözlerimi İstanbul'dan Ankara'ya
At the outset of my remarks, I would like to start by thanking all our citizens, all my brothers and sisters from Istanbul to Ankara who always stood with us and never left us alone. Likewise, I would like to thank everyone, every one of our observers who took part in the ballot boxes or our volunteers who held on to the ballot boxes. And I also would like to thank our brothers and sisters who undertook duty abroad as well. Without a doubt, our greatest thanks go to the Turkish nation, the Turkish people who took part in the elections by breaking records. And I would like to thank every one of our citizens who reflected their will in the election process. I would like to thank every one of our citizens for voting in this election. I also would like to extend my best regards to my brothers and sisters who voted for us, AK Party and the People's Alliance. Beyond the percentages, it is without a doubt that our nation has won this election. Our people has won this election. The Republic of Turkey is committed to the superiority of the national will, and the Republic of Turkey has once again shown that it is one of the leading democracies in the world.
Kardeşlerim,
my dear brothers and sisters,
seçimlere katılım oranının rekoruyla gösterdi.
This fact is being shown with the record level of participation in the elections. There are no such examples in the world. It is one of the highly participated elections in our history.
Huzur içinde
And we have seen that our people rushed to the ballot boxes and voted for their future. So we have completed this election without significant losses.
Bu gerçeği tüm parti temsilcilerinin gözetimi altında yürütülen
This is a fact. The election process has been carried out under the observation of all the political party representatives, and we have proven it once again. Dear brothers and sisters, the administrators of the Republican People Party and some of the mayors from the CHP
kendi iç hesaplaşmalarının ürünü feveranları bu gerçeği
have
değiştirmiyor.
indeed
Ülkemiz
acted
siyasi hak ve özgürlüklerin
by
kullanımı
taking into consideration their own political mileage.
bakımından
However,
dünyaya örnek
our
olacak
country
bir işleyişe sahiptir.
has been exemplary so far in terms of the trustworthiness of the election results.
Kendi kısır siyasi hesapları için
So
bozmaya
we will never allow anyone to destroy the reputation of our election process for their own political mileage. Throughout our political life, we have always
yani sizin
shown respect
kararınıza
to your
saygı duyuyoruz.
decision and the decision of the national will.
Bu seçimde de saygı duyuyoruz.
And we also show respect to the national will and the national decisions. And from now on, in the upcoming elections, we will continue to show our respect to the national will as well.
Cumhur İttifakı işini biliyor.
The People's Alliance know its
Görevini
business,
yaptınız.
and you have done your share.
Herkesten de biz aynı demokratik
And
olgunluğu bekliyoruz.
we are expecting the same level of democratic maturity from everyone.
Artık geride kalmış.
The discussions during the election process are over, so
Sözünü söylemiş.
everyone has said their words to our nation, and our nation has decided today.
Artık buna yeni kılıflar uydurmanın bir anlamı yok.
So from now on, there is no need to hush up and cover
Ne olduğunu
or
gayri
find
resmi kesin
excuses to
sonuçları
the results.
açıklandığında hep birlikte göreceğiz.
And we will see all together what the decision of our nation is when the official results are announced.
Kardeşlerim, sonuç
My dear
ne
brothers
olursa
and
olsun,
sisters, independently from the results,
Cumhurbaşkanlığında tercihini bizden yana yaptığı görülen
our nation,
27 milyona yakın
approximately
vatandaşımın
27 million of our citizens,
şükranlarımı sunuyorum.
have chosen us as the president, and I would like to thank every one of them for
Kimden yana
choosing me.
yaparsa yapsın,
It doesn't matter
demokrasi şölenine
which
katılan
candidate they have chosen.
56
Approximately
milyon vatandaşımızın
56
her
million of
birine
our citizens have participated in this
teşekkür
festival of democracy, and I would like to thank every one of them.
seçimlerde en yakın rakibimize
In the
şimdi
elections,
2 milyon 600 bin civarında
we have
fark attık.
won more than 2.6 million of the votes with our closest competitors.
Kesin sonuçların çıkmasıyla bu rakamın çok daha yükseleceğine
After
inanıyorum.
the official results are announced, I certainly believe that this difference will be even higher.
Artı bir oy sınırı sebebiyle.
Due to the fact that our election system requires 50% plus one of the votes, that's why we don't know whether
Milletimizin kararı
the election process is over in the first round.
tamamlandığını gösteriyorsa
If
zaten
the decision of our nation shows that the first round is enough to announce the president, there is no problem whatsoever.
seçimin ikinci tura
However,
kalmasından yana
if our
yaptıysa
nation has decided
onun da
to
başımızın üstünde yeri var.
proceed with the runoff election, We welcome it as well.
Biz %50'nin üzerinde bir oy oranıyla bu turu bitireceğimize
We
inanıyoruz.
certainly believe that we will win the elections in the first round with receiving more than 50% of the votes.
Tamamıyla ülkemize intikal etmiş değil.
Because we know that the votes abroad are still counted.
Teşkilat mensuplarımızdan
That's why
bize gönül veren
we request from our political party members and all our brothers and sisters who dedicated their hearts to us
işlemler bitene kadar
to hold on to the ballot boxes as the counting process is still going on.
gölgelenmesine yol açacak en küçük bir
We should
en küçük bir
not be
zafiyete
falling
izin vermeden
into despair, or we should show no weakness whatsoever, which might cast a shadow on our victory.
mevcut tabloyla bile Cumhur İttifakı
Even in the current situation, we have seen that we have also won the majority in the parliament as the People's Alliance.
şu anda parlamentoda
So right now,
Cumhur İttifakı'nda
People's Alliance have the majority in the parliament.
komisyonların genelinde Cumhur İttifakı hakimdir.
And the People's Alliance also has prevailed in all the parliamentary commissions.
Mecliste çoğunluğu
That's
Cumhur
why
İttifakı'na veren milletimizin tercihinin Cumhurbaşkanlığı
we also
seçiminde de
believe that our
güven ve
nation
istikrardan yana olacağından
most probably
şüphe duymuyoruz.
will be choosing stability and also security when it comes to the presidential candidates as they have chosen the People's Alliance in the parliament. I hope and pray that the election results will be auspicious for our country and for our people.
Gittiğimiz her meydanda
During this election process, we have visited many squares and we have given many promises and we have yielded the results. What did we say in the squares during the election process? Are we ready?
bir olacağız.
We will become one.
Hamdolsun milletimizin gönlündeki
Thanks to God,
yerimizi tahkim ederek
we have strengthened our position in the hearts of our people and we have become one.
biri olacağız.
We will become great.
Hamdolsun
Thanks to God,
ülkemizi daha da güçlendirerek
by
biri olduk mu?
strengthening our country, we have become even greater.
Biri olacağız dedik.
We said we will become firm. Thanks to
Milli
God,
iradenin üstünlüğü üzerindeki bulutları dağıtarak
we have cleaned the dark clouds collapsing on the superiority of the national will, and we have become
tercihi
much firmer. And we said we will become brothers and sisters, and independently from their decisions, we have come to this day as brothers and sisters, as 85 million citizens. Pay attention, we have never walked this path together with the terrorists.
biz Diyarbakır'daki Kürt kardeşlerimizin ölümüne neden olan Selo'yla beraber
We
olmadık.
didn't cooperate and collaborate with Selahattin, who caused the lives of 51 of our Kurdish brothers and sisters in Diyarbakir.
Katillerini dışarı salacağız
We
diyenlerle beraber
didn't
olmadık.
walk this path together with those who said that they will be breaking the doors of the prisons in order to release the baby murderers, and we didn't collaborate with those who received their orders from Kandil Mountain. Dear brothers and sisters,
Talimatı
we
sadece
receive our orders
Rabbimizden alırız,
only from our God,
milletimizden alırız.